My name's Andrew, and a few years ago I bought the ugliest house in my neighborhood, both inside and out. In this video, I'm going to show you how by pouring a ton of sweat equity into these 4 categories of projects, I was able to completely transform the curb appeal of this house. Let's get this party started with the cosmetic upgrades. To kick off this curb appeal transformation, I started by power washing the entire house from top to bottom. And as I was washing this asbestos siding, I noticed a few of the tiles were cracked, so I removed those and I replaced them with some fiber cement siding that you can buy from Home Depot. And some people will say you really shouldn't work with asbestos due to like health reasons and breathing in the fibers, but I'm really doing just fine. Just wear a respirator. And the house also had this abandoned metal chimney attached to the side of it, so I removed that. And after cutting out the attachment where it actually connected to the house, I was left with this 18-inch crater in my foundation, which I filled in with some rapid setting concrete. In hindsight, I probably should have used some reinforcement, but fingers crossed it holds up. Then I just removed the brackets, filled the holes with caulk, and then we taped off all of the windows and doors so I could paint the siding and the soffit using this airless paint sprayer. And after the paint dried, we removed the paper and tape, and my brother and I put up some new shutters. And at this point, I did a little Mickey Mouse project and made some new custom house numbers for the home so that I could actually receive mail. And for the last little cosmetic project here, I had to remove the front door because it was cracked in a few locations and it was in desperate need of replacement. So I started by removing the brick mold on the exterior, and you're also going to want to pull off the trim on the inside of the door as well. You're likely going to find a few screws attaching the door frame to the house, and I recommend you just cut through those using a Sawzall. And after cutting through the screws, I removed the entire door and the frame from my home. So here's how we look in full summer Jeep mode, but I vacuumed out the dust and debris from underneath the door, measured the length for the sill plate, and then I put some construction adhesive down, glued that PVC sill plate in place. That's going to direct any water away from the home. Then I flashed the perimeter of the door frame, caulked around the back side of the brick mold, lifted the new door into place, and got it positioned properly. And after shimming everything out, checking for level, and screwing the door frame to the house, I took some spray foam insulation and I applied that all the way around the perimeter between the door frame and the home, and then cut off the excess. Then I painted the door this Smurf blue color, which you're going to see throughout the rest of the video. And for the last cosmetic project, I built this custom mailbox, which I think looks pretty good. Now, let me show you how I completely transformed the front entryway of the home. I started by removing the old flimsy metal railings by unscrewing them where they attach to the house and then cutting them off where they were embedded into the concrete steps. And after getting those removed, it was time to power wash that existing staircase. And I don't know what it is, guys, but there's just something oddly satisfying about a good power wash. But these stairs still looked like crap, so I decided to resurface them using this Newcrete product. And I gotta be honest with you guys, hindsight is always 20/20, but I really think I should have just demolished this entire staircase and started from scratch. This is kind of lipstick. I don't want to say lipstick on a pig, but it kind of is lipstick on a pig. It's just an ugly staircase, and regardless if it looks perfect or it looks crappy, it's just going to be kind of unimpressive. So I wish I did something different, but if you stick around till the end, you'll see that I think I made the best of a bad situation. As the final step here, I applied a sealer to prevent it from staining, and I'd love to get your feedback on all of these projects down in the comments. Now, let's get rid of the sidewalk leading up to the steps. So typically for a small sidewalk like this, you would just rent a jackhammer, but I was able to get a killer deal for this guy online. So we're gonna test it out, see how it goes. This was my first time using a jackhammer, and after almost jackhammering both my feet, I got the hang of it. With my front walkway turned to rubble, let's start thinking about how we're going to repair it. So this is going to be 2 parts. It's going to be the concrete landing and then this curved sidewalk. I started by marking the outline of the concrete landing with some spray paint, and then you're going to go ahead and excavate down around 8 inches. 4 inches for the gravel subbase, and then 4 inches or so for the concrete sidewalk. And I dug out some deep footers that were below the frost depth in each corner to serve as the foundation for the porch overhang I'm going to build at the end of the video. And after compacting the soil, adding the stone, compacting the stone, I built the concrete forms using some 2x6 and 1x6 lumber, staked it in place, made sure it was square, and then filled the entire form area up with some concrete. We mixed all the concrete by hand using a drum mixer, which was, if I'm being honest, a nightmare, but eventually we got it done. We finished the surface using a hand trowel, and then we gave it a broom finish. After letting it dry, we removed the forms, and I started prepping the area for the curved sidewalk. And to build the curved forms, I had the guys at Home Depot rip down 4-inch strips of hardboard so that I could get the curvature I wanted. And after getting everything level, I compacted the stone, installed the steel wire mesh reinforcement, and then I applied some WD-40 as a form release agent to the forms. Now, because I had a bunch of issues with that initial pour and the mechanical mixer binding up, I almost broke down and ordered concrete to be delivered delivered, but I came across this product called the mud mixer, which we used for this pour. And although lifting 40-pound bags of concrete over and over again still wasn't fun, this was a lot smoother than the drum mixers. So we filled the entire form area with concrete, screeded everything smooth, used an edging trowel around the edges to give us a rounded edge, and then finished the surface using a finishing trowel, and then gave it the final broom finish before adding a couple control joints to hopefully control where the concrete cracks in the future, if it ever does. And I know that I'm going fast here, but I have dedicated videos for all of these projects on my channel, and I also have this blog linked down below that goes through everything in detail. And after letting the concrete dry, I just removed the forms. Now, if you remember that railing we removed a few minutes ago, now it's time to replace it. So I used a laser level to mark the post locations for the new railing, and then I marked the locations for the bolts using a Sharpie. After drilling the holes using a hammer drill and a carbide tip masonry bit, I positioned the railing posts in place, inserted the expansion anchors, and tightened them down preliminarily. Then I used a post level to make sure everything was level and plumb, used shims as necessary, then tightened everything down and cut off the excess shims. I had to cut off the excess bolts using a sawzall in a few locations, then I installed the post caps. This is the black cool railing system manufactured by Musada, and I basically just followed the manufacturer's instructions to install it. The trickiest part was finding the angle there for when the railing starts going down the stairs, but after making that cut, I just had to pre-drill the holes and screw everything together. And although I love the look of wire railings, installing them is kind of a pain in the butt because you have to install the hardware and tighten each strand of wire individually, which can be pretty tedious. But eventually, we got all the wires installed and got the tension just right. With the front entryway complete, let's turn our attention to some gardening and landscaping. Now, if we rewind just a bit, there used to be a silver maple in my front yard, and because it was rotting out and slightly leaning towards my house, I decided to hire a contractor to come in and remove the tree and then grind up the stump. They left me with this beautiful patch of dirt, which I'm going to fix later, but now I want to focus on the front garden. So here's a look at the front garden before we got started, and the whole idea is that we're going to add a new concrete curb edging as shown in green. I started by removing all the old mulch and weeds to give myself a clean slate. Then I established my offset from the house, marked the boundary, and then I excavated down 4 inches, got the area relatively level, and then I compacted the dirt. After that, I picked up my gravel subbase, set my depth, and then I added around 4.5 inches of gravel subbase into the curb area. I also added a weed barrier to hopefully prevent weeds from growing up in the future. After compacting the stone with the hand tamp, it's time to build the concrete forms, and just like with the sidewalk, we're using lumber. To set the forms, I double checked the offset from the house, and then I set the locations using stakes. And I used a 6-foot level to make sure we were on track. Then I cut 6-inch pieces of blocking to give myself a uniform spacing between the 2 boards of 6 inches. That's going to be the width of our concrete curb. Where 2 boards met, I used a piece of bracing to make sure they were perfectly level and in line. After continuously checking level, I cut the forms to round the corner, used a framing square to make sure we were just that, square, and then I completed the form area. In hindsight, I wish I would have gone with a rounded corner, but the square corner, I guess, is what we're going to live with. And just like the front entryway, I used Rapid Set 24/6 concrete mix and the mud mixer to mix all of the concrete by hand. I used a shovel to move the concrete around within the forms, and then a finishing trowel to get it relatively smooth to start. I also used a reciprocating saw without a blade to vibrate the forms to fill up any air voids. And because the mud mixer's on wheels, I was literally able to roll down the entire length of the form area, filling it up with concrete. After filling up the forms with concrete, I took my edging trowel to give the edges of the concrete curb a rounded edge, and then I went back and cleaned up any of the hard lines with my finishing trowel. Because concrete will inevitably crack, I added control joints every 4 feet on center, so when it does crack, it'll hopefully crack within that joint. After adding the rest of the control joints, I cleaned up any of the rough edges using a finishing trowel. Here's a look at the finished product right as the sun was setting, and then the next day I went and I removed the concrete forms. If you use a form release agent like WD-40, the form should come off really easy. And for landscaping, I kept it simple with some low maintenance evergreens and some black mulch. Next, I turned my attention to the lawn, and I started by filling in the gap around the garden curb with some topsoil, and I applied a bunch of topsoil to the area where that tree was removed previously. Then I rented an aerator and aerated my entire lawn. After aerating, I did a bit of dethatching, removed all the weeds and thatch from the yard, and I planted some grass seed, spreading it around evenly using a seed spreader and applying it by hand around the garden curb. After applying seed, I sprinkled a bit more topsoil and I made sure to water the grass. And while we wait for the grass to grow, let's finalize this curb appeal transformation with an architectural improvement. Although this house has come a long way from where we started, the haters down in the comments let me know that the house was still pretty ugly. And deep down, I knew that the house was missing something. So I did some curb appeal research on Pinterest, and then it hit me. A gable porch overhang over the front door might solve my issue. So I modeled everything in SketchUp and got to work. Now, if I'm being honest with you, I always had this idea in the back of my mind, which is why I dug those deep concrete footers at each corner of my concrete landing. But before we install those vertical support columns, we have to demolish the gutters and remove some of the shingles above the door. I also had to remove that first sheet of plywood so that I could access the front wall of the home, which we're going to use to support our gable porch overhang. After opening up the roof, I determined the location for the vertical support columns, and I pre-drilled the anchor bolt hole using my hammer drill. Then I set the post anchors in place, installed the anchor bolt, and tightened everything up. And before we get into the framing, I want to let you know that I have a completely free ebook that you can download. This is going to have a cost estimate for this entire project, as well as all these framing instructions in detail. For the vertical support columns, I went with 6x6 pressure treated lumber, and we cut that to size and positioned it in place inside the post anchor, and then we tacked the horizontal board in place to hold everything together temporarily. The next step was to cut another 6x6 to go horizontally between the vertical 6x6s, and we cut that and installed it off camera, unfortunately. After securing everything up top, we permanently screwed the vertical support column to that post anchor in the concrete. And after getting that first portion framed, we installed a new piece of plywood roof decking so we had something to walk on. Okay, so despite checking the weather for days beforehand and checking the radar, we had this blip of rain show up out of nowhere, so now we're at the tarp house. Murphy's Law, man. Anything that will go wrong anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Something like that. Next, we cut the angle on the ridge board to a 412 roof pitch, since that's the pitch of our roof. And again, if you want all the details on how I found my roof pitch and a lot of the details for how we framed this, you can check out my free ebook. Everything is specified in detail within that. So as you can see there, we had to remove a few more of the asphalt shingles so that we were actually dealing with the roof decking, and then we adjusted the height of that ridge board to give us approximately a 612 roof pitch for the gable, and then I tacked the ridge board in place using my framing nailer. And at this point, I went back to the front of the gable and I cut off all the overhanging boards to a consistent 18-inch overhang. And after that was done, we installed the rafters. Now, there was a little bit of math and cutting involved to cut the rafters, but essentially, you're going to need to make a plumb cut that matches the pitch of your gable where it intersects with the ridge board. You'll need to cut a bird's mouth cut where it intersects with the horizontal joist, and then you'll have to make one more plumb cut at the back end for the tail of the rafter. We made these cuts using a circular saw and a jigsaw, and once you cut one rafter, you can use it as a template to mark all of your other cuts. And after nailing the rafters in place, I cut the fascia board so that the angle would match the roof where it intersects with the house, and then I attached that to the tails of the rafters. And at this point, it was time to cut and install the valley plate and the valley rafters. And I don't want to get too technical with this since I have a dedicated video and an ebook showing exactly how to build this. But the main takeaway for these is you have to cut the bottom of the rafter at a beveled angle so that it sits on the valley plate properly. And if you cut all your angles correct, it should look something like that. Here's a look at everything nailed together, and then we installed the plywood roof decking over top. Next up, we installed PVC fascia trim on the front of the house and also over the gable. And if you guys are getting some kind of value from this video, I would really appreciate if you could drop a like down below and drop a comment. All the engagement really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm, and I would appreciate it. And although I was tempted to do the roofing on the gable myself, my entire roof needed to be replaced, so I bit the bullet and just hired a contractor. And with the top of the gable complete, I turned my attention to the underside, and I first built this cage at the back so that I could install tongue and groove soffit boards on both the back and the underside of the gable. And I also wanted to spice up the support columns, so I decided to wrap the base with this pillar wrap product that looks like stone. To install it, you first have to shim out the support column to give it a bit of additional thickness, and then you glue and screw the panels in place. And you guessed it, I have a dedicated video for that as well. Then I simply installed the post caps and cleaned everything up with some caulk. There are a few more finishing touches with this gable, but I want to tell you guys a story in the meantime. So I rolled the dice and decided to build this gable porch without getting a permit, and I thought I got away with it because like 2 or 3 months after the fact, I still hadn't heard anything until one fateful day I saw this notice on my door saying that this was not in compliance and I had to bring it up to code. So I had to retroactively get everything permitted, which was a bit of a pain in the butt, but eventually we got it done. And once I finished staining the underside of this gable, this curb appeal transformation is complete. Let's take a quick reminder look at where this project started. And here is a look at the final result. Now, at the end of the day, this is still a 1,000 square foot rancher, but all things considered, I think we made the most lemonade possible out of a lemon looking house, at least initially. I would love to get your feedback on this curb appeal transformation down in the comments, and I'll try to answer every question that you guys have. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below, consider subscribing if you like DIY content, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.